Unfortunately, recently Sega has stated that casino is basically not in their plans for New Genesis. So because of that, I wanted to bring the casino to New Genesis myself through the creative spaces here. And I want to start it off with making a blackjack table. So as you can see here, I have a lot of these cubes and axis things. So I want to explain it all on how it works, but let's just show it off just to see what happens here. So there's 4 different sections, so for 4 different players, and within that section, I can jump to check the number that I have for my current spot. Then once I punch, it generates a random number that adds to that cube. And that just kind of works like drawing cards or hitting in Blackjack. So I want to get to as close to 21 as possible, which I got a 20 there. So then I press this axis to stay, and then you do the same for the rest of these here. And then once everybody does that, it tells what the dealer got. Right there at 19, so I ended up winning. I beat the dealer. I got that 20. So then after a little while, it resets, and you can do it all over again. That was the quick little teaser of the table. There's more to it than that, but I want to go through the process of how I made this in the first place. So I started off with this section over here, trying to make like the basics of it for having like the visuals and all of that. So with this setup, there's a number of different things to look at. There's the player's side, and then the dealer's side. We're going to start with the players first. For the player, it's broken up into a couple of different parts. You have a way to hit or draw a new card, and a way to display your own number, kind of figure out what you have, and be able to keep checking just in case you forgot. So for this, you just have to press the axis switch to on, and then it sends a function to all of these 10 different cubes here to then be sent to the count up cube. So then when I turn this off, it displays the number I got a 4. Yeah, if I just want to double check that number, just in case I forgot if I want to hit or not, I can just keep pressing this to show that. Let's see how this works behind the scenes though with the edit mode and then with the settings tool. So first off with the switch, this has the switch on function sent out on the 999. This can be any number that you choose as long as all my 999s match up, the same way as whatever number you choose. And then I have a switch off on the 11. Yeah, the 999 gets sent to all these random cubes, and the switch off sends out to the count up cube to display the number. Now to see that, this random block, once it receives a 999, it sends out to a 1 or a 998. So with this, I chose 1 to be a increase in the count, and then the 998 is just a dead number, but it needs to be there. So if it gets sent to that, it doesn't do anything. That's kind of like the randomizations of this. It either increases the count or it doesn't. That's kind of like what the card is chosen. So basically, with all these, they're the exact same. So whatever ones choose that first option, that's what the card is going to end up being. So if like 5 of these end up choosing the ones and the rest don't, then I drew a 5. If 7 got chosen, then it would be a 7. If it's a 10, then it would be like just any of the 10 cards, so base cards or a 10. There's a important thing to note about the last cube that I have here, though, is that it doesn't send to the 998 at all. It just has the 1 option there. That's because you have to have at least a minimum of 1 because of an ace card. Usually you can do like 1 or 11 with aces, but the way that this is set up, I just can't really do that, have it be 1 or 11 and then change later. That'd just be like way too confusing for a system like this. But basically, whenever an ace is done, then at least has that 1 minimum instead of it just being a chance of drawing a 0, which doesn't exist. So yeah, that all gets sent to this cube here, where it increases the count on the 1. And then that 11 that we saw on the switch when it gets turned off, then it displays the count. Then I have a couple more numbers on this cube itself, where if it gets to 22, then it sends out a 12, and it sends it to this data pod here, which is just a thing that says that it busts. So if you go beyond 21, you essentially lose, and you have to retry. With this, it has a reset count on a 13, so it just goes back to 0 whenever this switch is pressed. That just basically resets the game, because this setup right here doesn't do it automatically. It's basically all there is to the player's side. Like, there is this other button that just displays the number as well, but that works the same as the off function, where it sends out an 11 to display the number. This doesn't, like, hit for a new card. But now let's take a look at the dealer's side. So with this, the way that I have it set up here is that when I press this on, then it sends out to the random cubes in the back, and then it generates a number, the number 17. And then if I want to check the dealer's number over and over again, I just press this number here, and it'll show that 17. So just like with the player's side, let's take a look at the functions behind it. It actually works very similar to it too, where with the switch, it just has two different numbers, a 201 and a 202. So this works just like the 999 with the player's side, and this works like the 11 on the player's side. It's the same thing with this switch here, where it has the 202, just like how this had the 11. But instead of it being 10 random blocks, it's all of these blocks back here at once. Because we don't want it to be like the player where it's just drawing one card at a time. We want to do it all at once. So I have 30 blocks here to generate that number. And this works just the same, where it has a 101 to increase the dealer's cube, and that has a 102, which sends to nothing. You can also have this number here be 998, like I did on the other side, because they would just both send to nothing anyways, if you wanted to save on some function numbers. But I basically repeat that through the majority of these cubes, except for the 2 at the end, because that is a minimum that you can have with the game. So if it drawed 2 aces and that was it, then that would be the number. You could also change the range of how many cubes are like that. So if you didn't want the dealer to have a minimum of 2, you could just like make more of these cubes not have that function there. So it has like a minimum of like 10 or 13, so it doesn't get that low. Just be cautious about that, because if you raise the minimum too high, then it will bust too often, like get above 21, because all these other cubes are still randomly giving an increase to those kind of numbers. But yeah, just keep like a range that you would like with the game. You could even do it on the opposite side, where maybe, you just reduce the amount of random blocks here so there isn't 30. Like maybe you can only go up to like 25 or something like that. Okay, this all just gets sent to the dealer's cube, which I have over here at this table because I'm still using that part over here, where it just increases on that 101, and then it shows the current count on that 202, like from the switch and that button. And then it resets the count on the 201, so when the switch gets pressed on. So I do it this way because it's just drawn all at once anyways, and doesn't need a separate reset button. And then also at the top, when it reaches beyond the 21, so like where it would bust in a blackjack game, then it sends out a 22, where it goes to a data pod that just says the dealer busts. So it just shows the message on that 22. That's basically the whole process for a single player and a dealer setup. So pretty much just like the bare minimum you can do for a blackjack game. But with this, you may be wondering or thinking, like, is there any way to reduce the amount of cubes here? Because it takes the 10 plus for the player, the 30 over here for the dealer. There's got to be a way to reduce it so it doesn't take as long to make. Well, technically there is, but then it would make the game very, very slow. So I have it set up over here where it only uses these 3 cubes to do the dealer plus 1 extra for that other dealer cube, where instead of having the 30 random cubes, it actually sends to a timer to have this repeat in a looping pattern 30 times to send to this random block, which goes to that dealer cube over there to generate that number. And then this count of cube just stops the timer after it does that 30 times. But as you can imagine, with the count down cube, it does it once per second. So it would take 30 seconds to do the dealer. I don't know if you guys want to see the functions behind this, but essentially the timer would get that 999 into the start countdown. I don't have it here because I don't want it to interfere. But you put that there, and then it would start going around that 1 second. And then once it hits that 1 second, it sends out a 3, which resets itself to then just keep going again and again and again. And then that 3 also gets sent to this to start up. And then it sends out a 101 or a 102, just like those other dealer cubes. And then that just gets sent over there to keep upping the number until it's stopped by this cube here. This goes up to 30 count, which is the max on one of these cubes. That's kind of nice that it does get up to that number. But basically, it keeps increasing on a 3, which is, every time this goes. And it also shows the current count on a 3 just for me to see with testing, but don't need that there. and then it just keeps doing that. And then once it hits that 30 mark, it sends out a 202, which you'd have this stop on a 202. So the stop countdown would be there, and then it would also display the dealer cube's number as we saw earlier, and make sure that it resets itself. So like the next time you generate a dealer's number, it doesn't have anything stored in it. But yeah, it would just be way too slow with this method. Nobody would want to sit through 30 seconds of the dealer just drawing cards very slowly. Yeah, I wish we could use this method in a more instant fashion, like these 30 cubes over here. I would love to know that. But I just don't think there's really a great way without adding just more cubes here, because like you could add like another timer that would have it to 15 seconds, and if you added like a third one, it would go to 10 seconds. But then as you go on, it'd be more and more timers, which may like bug out the game because you can only have so many functions happening at once. And I believe the timers are a little bit more intensive versus these random blocks. But yeah, I would love to know if anybody could figure that out to reduce this count, but still have the same functionality. And now let's move over to this side, which is a little bit more complex in terms of it being automatic, as well as up to 4 different players at a time. Let's explain how this side works one more time, where basically with this, there is collision boxes, where the bottom here, I punch to hit for a number in front of me with this count up cube. And then I can also jump to check my number instead of pressing a separate button. I just keep going, until I get close to 21 or, eventually bust. 18, that's a good number. So then I press E for the access switch in front of me to then lock in my number and wait for the other players to finish. So these others, eventually they, also stay, or maybe, eventually they would also bust themselves. Or if they do so, I also have it set up on this side to automatically have them like stay or get out of the game. They're not waiting on them. So like if they keep punching beyond 21, nothing's going to happen. Then I'll just press E on that, and then with all those pressed, eventually the dealer will show its number with a 16 there, and you can still check for a few seconds. Oh yeah, I beat them on that one. Not there, etc. But there would be like 4 people there instead of just me by myself. Now, just like the last setup, let's take a look at the functions behind this, starting with the players. So before we had switches and buttons for, hitting for cards and checking the number, but this time I have collision boxes instead. So for the bottom box, this is where you're attacking or hitting for that card. So I have that set up with this trigger action. Then when that action is performed, it sends out a certain number based on the player's spot. So for player 1, it sends out a 31 to its set of random cubes. So these get that 31 down below, and then it chooses either of these options. So a 32, which increases that player's count cube, or sends out to that 998, which, like before, sends to nothing. And then also within this set, there is a cube, which just has the 1 option, as a ace could be pulled, but a 0, you can't pull nothing. And then with that, the cube pretty much functions the same as before too, where it increases on the count of that 32 sent by those random cubes, and then shows the current count on a 33. This is where it's a little bit different, but still kind of the same. So it used to be the off switch, or the off portion of the switches back there, but instead I have a delay cube. Whenever it gets 31, which is when somebody punches, it does a delay for a single second and then sends out a 33 to display the number. The reason why I do this instead of just like having the collision box also display the number instantly is because a delay needs to be there, otherwise it doesn't update the number properly. It shows the number before the random cubes send out theirs, essentially. So like you could get a number from what you pulled before, like it shows like a 0 or whatever else. It doesn't show the actual number inside. But that's just the hitting portion of this. The box above it is to display the number. So whenever a jump is received into the top block, then it sends out a 33, which just displays the number on this block here. But then for when this ends or like stops getting numbers, is when it hits the bust portion, if you go above 21, it sends out a 34, which cancels out the sending and receiving connects of this hit block here. So that means even if you punch, it's not going to keep increasing the number. It just, you're stuck at that until everybody is done. Also, when you hit this switch in front where you stay, it does the same thing where it sends out a 34 where you can't keep increasing your number and you stay at the number you are currently at. And then also with that same number, you got to make sure that you disable the access detection of that same switch. That way they keep, unstaying or staying, something like that. Like once they press that button, they are locked in. But yeah, that's everything to do with a player. This is just repeated with the other players, where it's just different sets of numbers. So like 41 here instead of 31. I just kept increasing it by 10, pretty much for all of these numbers across the board. And then they have their own set of cubes for each of the players. You just gotta make sure it all matches up properly. So for player 2 here, it has the 42 as well. So kind of just that same matching of the 10 increase. It has its own delay cube, which is on that 43, which sends to its own count up cube here. And it has its own set of numbers as well, where it influences its set of collision boxes and its own access switch, where if I can actually get in there, maybe I'll look at a different one here, player 3's. 54 is that switch on, instead of it being 34 like the other switch over there. And now let's take a look at the dealer itself. It's pretty similar to what I have over there because I just basically copied it. I didn't remake it. But for this, you do need a setup for the 4 players, so it takes them all into account instead of showing the dealer's number early. For this, I used a few of the combo cubes to act as AND statements to get all of the players' finishing functions. So then once they're all taken, it does that dealer's number and then resets the game. So for this first combo cube, it takes in player 1's and player 2's ending numbers whenever the player stays or they go above 21 and bust. So this player 1, player 2, and then once it receives that, it sends out a 131, which goes to this cube here. It's the same with this other one, where it takes player 3 and 4 and sends out a 151 to go into this cube. And then once this cube receives both of those numbers, it sends out a 201, which we saw from earlier, denoted by this crab. Sends out to all of those 30 cubes at once to then generate some number into this dealer block. But instead of turning off the switch like over there to display the number, I have a delay block here, which once it gets a 201, after a couple seconds, it displays the dealer's number. And then that 202 gets sent to this delay block. So then for 5 seconds at the end of the game, there's like a little pause, and it's to just show your own numbers to see if you won or not. And then it sends out a 203, which resets basically everything. So with these collision boxes, you get access to them again with its enable sending and receiving connections. So whenever you attack again, it sends out an increase to the count. And then also with these switches, it resets those, so you get access detection with them again, as well as switching them off for the next round. And then with these count up cubes, it resets the count, so you're no longer above 21 or whatever number you had before. It also resets some stuff on the dealer side with these combo blocks, where it resets their contents, so it doesn't hold these IDs anymore, and you do that for each and every one. Otherwise, if like a single player finished a game in the next round, then it would end the game showing a new dealer number and nobody else would be able to finish, so you need to do that as well. That was everything involved for doing a 4-person blackjack table that automatically resets itself. But what if you want a varying player count, like if you're by yourself playing solo, or have 2 people, 3 people, or the 4, which is the maximum for this table? Well, you can actually set that up pretty easily, and you only need a small amount of cubes here. To demonstrate this, I'll press the 1 player button. So it should essentially turn off these other 3, so I can't hit for them. Now, as you see, I'm not getting any number increases, but if I hit for the first player's spot, it'll increase and hit for cards. There's a 14. If I press that, it should also quit the game with just the 1 player. There it is, a 14, so we ended up tying with that one. But you can also do the same after it resets the game. I can just go to a 2, so 2 players. So then I won't do anything for like player 3 or 4. Then once I hit 2 or 1, it'll start increasing the count. So let's take a look at the functions behind this. With each spot, we have a different button which sends out a different function. So the solo spot sends out a 401 when I switch it on, and then this sends out a 402 on the duo spot, 403, and then 404 for the 4-player. And this activates these combo cubes attached to them. So when this gets sent a 401 and a 401, so basically if just 401 is set, period, it sends out a 44, which cancels out player 2 spot for this first cube. Then the second cube does the same, it just takes a 401, and then sends out a 54, which cancels out the third spot. And the same with this last cube, taking a 401, sending out a 64 to cancel out player 4s. And as we saw earlier, this also is the conditioning numbers for this stuff back here. So it receives the 54, 64, sends out the 151, and then also receives the 44, but not the 34 yet, because that's, for the first player. So essentially, only the first player needs to do something to then complete this cycle. The same is done with the other spots, but just cancels out less players. So with this being sent to a 402, cancels out player 3, and then once this is sent a 402 as well, it cancels out player 4. Then for the 3-player spot, it just cancels out player 4, and then for the last spot, it doesn't cancel out anybody. What's this extra combo block on each of these? Well, this actually sends out a 997 when it receives that corresponding number. That is the same for each of these, where it cancels out the collision of these buttons. So if I press number 2, it's not going to let me press, number 3 or 4 now since that is selected. So it doesn't like confuse the game. So now it's just permanently 2 until that round is completed, and then it resets everything. Or this has that reset on the 203 as we saw earlier, so it switches the button off as well as enables the collision again. And that's everything there is to the player selection. Unfortunately, with this, it doesn't stay the certain selected number with the way that I have it set up. So once it finishes that round, it goes back to a 4-player version until you press another button again. And also with that, you don't really need the 4-player section. I just like having it. That way, if I press this, nobody else can come up and, select a different player count if we're in the middle of a game. That is everything, though, that I have for this Blackjack table in New Genesis. This can definitely be improved upon, like having it hit 2 numbers off the bat, because, usually with Blackjack, you have 2 cards drawn before you go, so you can have it set up that way when you reset the game, as well as having, maybe a 5-card count as well, so a separate count-up cube that's like, oh, you reached 5, so then it, stays for you, because there's a 5-card special thing as well. And finally, you can also make it more visually appealing than what I have here. I did the bare minimum here. You could have maybe cards showing up in front of the players, hiding all of these cubes so the players don't see all of that too. And maybe making the table a little bit more fancy, something like that. But let me know what you guys think of this Blackjack in New Genesis. If you'd like to see more casino games or other things done with the creative spaces. I'll see you in the next one though. Peace.